Helena never expected the taste of humiliation would linger longer than any food she had ever cooked. Friday nights had a sound, not a song, but a steady rhythm that tasted like heat and metal and hope. Olo legato, the kind of restaurant people named in anniversaries and apologies, pulsed like a living thing under the warm lamps. Knives ticked against cutting boards. Ovens roared in breaths. The hum of conversation in the dining room swelled and fell like the sea. It was the hour when strangers trusted cooks to place memory and comfort and risk on plates and call it dinner. Helena adjusted the strap of a faded apron that had known too much flame and too many nights. 32 years old, hands chapped in winter, nicked by steel all seasons. Not chef on the menu, not in the eyes of the owner, but to the brigade and the fire, she was chef enough. The kitchen, a narrow corridor of heat, flashed in signals that didn't need words. Watch your elbow, sauce too tight, flame too high. Now. She moved through it like someone who knew exactly how wide her shoulders were, and exactly when to be smaller or larger than a moment demanded. Caesar belonged to the room that smelled of money and perfume. Navy suit cut so sharp it seemed it could slice the air. Hair arranged with the attention of someone who expected cameras even where they weren't. Smile luminous without warmth. He knew where to stand, so every light found him. While the first wave of appetizers left the pass, he cruised the dining room like a captain on a ship built out of other people's hands. He noticed something in the doorway, a pause in the constant stream of bodies, and his smile thinned. A critic had arrived. Anonymous to most, obvious to Caesar because Caesar had trained his eyes to catch small threats. A man in an ordinary shirt, a notebook in a jacket pocket worn at the edges, the way only tools and truths get worn. The critic sat, refused wine with a small gesture, and looked at the menu as if it were a photograph of a childhood home he didn't recognize anymore. Caesar slid into the kitchen, voice low as the lid on a simmer. "Special tonight," he told Helena without preamble. "Invent something that turns the head toward us. He's here." He didn't need to name the critic. The room knew. "We're at capacity," Helena answered calmly, not defiant, merely true. "Oven's regulator is inconsistent. We're short 2 hands. Specials mean reconfiguring the line." "Then reconfigure," Caesar said, the word bending like metal in a vise. "Give them a show. That's what they've come for." "They've come for food cooked correctly," she said. "A show won't feed them." His eyes slid past her, surveying flames and people like numbers on a page. "Do your job." He left the smell of cologne behind like a signature. Helena didn't hate him. Hate took too much seasoning from a person, left them dry. She had long ago learned to cook for people who would never know they needed what she was making. She looked to her brigade. Soraya on fish, Thomas on grill, Kata on salads, a young runner named Leo who still tripped over the word, "Yes, chef." She rearranged tasks with a precision that would never be called leadership by men who only recognized orders given at a shout. She tasted sauces with the back of a spoon. She adjusted salt as if it were an apology that could be accepted or refused. She worked. The kitchen breathed in heat. The oven's regulator flickered, then steadied, then flickered again. A candle, in a draft. She split the roast between 2 smaller pans to spread risk, moved the lamb to a cooler shelf, set a pan of water in the bottom to add humidity. When something resists, don't push it, her mother used to say. Coax it. Invite it to be what it is supposed to be. Orders stacked. Tickets clamped to the rail looked like a small paper city. The line marched. Helena composed a dish, leek confit, charred lemon, lamb carrying just enough smoke to suggest a fireplace 5 rooms away, barley, risotto loosened to silk. She taught the runner how to carry the plate. Level, hips steady, walk like water. Leo nodded, too eager. A colt in a room full of glass. The first plate reached the critic. He lifted his fork, cut a bite, closed his eyes briefly the way people do when something reminds them of a word on the tip of the tongue. The kitchen exhaled as one. Then, a shout. Not pain, not joy. Surprise. The second plate, following the first by a minute, slipped. The runner's shoes skimmed oil. On the floor, the plate left his hands, hovered briefly in the air, then surrendered to gravity and shattered at the critic's feet. The sauce fanned across shoes and tile like a map of a country no one wanted to visit. Silence arrived like a guest who didn't knock. Then phones came out because the city had learned to eat with its eyes, and sometimes its eyes were cruel. Cesar appeared as if conjured by applause no one gave. He clapped, slow, 3 times. The sound was obscene in a room made for softer noises. He waited for the silence to turn toward him. It did. He put a hand on Helena's shoulder and turned her slightly toward the dining room, like a presenter angling a product. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said loud enough to make sure the last table heard, "our team strives for excellence. When we fail, we own it. This," he gestured to Helena, "is a promising cook." Promising. But tonight, she forgot what stage she's on. Helena felt every eye as a heat separate from the kitchens. The critic in his seat did not move. He wrote something in the notebook with care, the way mourners write names in guest books. "Chef," Helena began, with the word that always felt too big in her mouth for a man who made himself bigger by standing on others. Cesar smiled at the room, not at her. "Go home, Helena," he said gently, so the cruelty would slide into the world wearing a polite coat. "Learn to cook for your neighbors before you cook for my name." He took hold of the strings of her apron and tore them loose. The sound of fabric parting felt like a verdict. He tossed the strings to the floor as if shedding a snakeskin and let them lie there. Helena did 3 things she would later understand as the start of saving herself. She picked up the broken plate pieces with her own hands so the busser wouldn't cut his, her fingers moving through danger with careful respect. She did not cry, and she left without apologizing for a gravity that owed her nothing. Outside, the wind smelled like old coins and exhaust. She walked because walking is the only thing that moves time at the right speed when a person has been made smaller in public. By morning, the city's rumor engines had chewed through versions of her. She had put soap in the sauce. She had screamed at a patron. She had sabotaged her own station out of jealousy for a colleague she secretly loved. She had served meat raw to a child. She had burned down the kitchen, but somehow the building still stood. The truth, that a runner slipped on oil and a plate fell, and a man used another person's worst moment as a stage, was too simple to satisfy a city trained to savor complications. Her apartment on the 7th floor had a stove that took its time waking. The light in the kitchen was honest. It told the truth about crumbs and about the way steam stains paint over years. She opened the fridge. Eggs, onions, a jar of fat rendered from last winter's soup bones, saved for a day when a flavor needed depth without grandstanding. On the door, magnets held recipes written in a dead woman's handwriting. Her mother had written with a hand heavy enough to make the pen mark through to the second sheet. "Caramelize onions until you forget what hurry feels like. Butter is not forgiveness, it's a blanket. If you cry in the kitchen, let it season, not flood." Helena cried for a minute and did not let it become a flood. Then she pulled onions, peeled them, sliced them thin. She salted them early to teach them the inevitability of surrender. She put the pan on low and waited until the kitchen started to smell like the part of an afternoon when a house thinks it is empty and realizes someone is home. She toasted bread in a skillet with the old fat. She heated stock in a pot she had brought from her mother's house when they took apart the kitchen after the funeral, and realized a room is most itself when it is used. She put a bowl on the windowsill to cool and leaned on the counter, listening to the city's bones shift in mourning. A knock broke a thought in half. Dona Lourdes from 7B stood in a blue housecoat with white flowers. "I smelled something and thought maybe I should be religious about it," she said, a smile that softened her eyes to the shape of a crescent moon. Helena offered her the bowl. "Be religious, Dona." The old woman ate with slow spoonfuls, eyes half closed. Halfway through, she put the spoon down and said, "Do you know how this tastes?" She didn't wait for an answer. "Like when my Raul came home from the night shift at the hospital and washed his hands, and I took his lunchbox and put water on to boil. We were too tired to make anything more than onion soup, but he always sat close when he ate, as if the chair would otherwise miss him." She took another spoonful and shook her head. "I didn't know I had that memory still in me. You gave it back to me. Some sentences are instructions for an entire year." Helena wrote a note and slid it under the doors on her floor. "Soup on the landing today. Bring a bowl." At 6, the hallway filled with the sound of feet that meant food was coming. The world's simplest inventory assembled: bowls, spoons, an old card table, 2 kettles that had known many kitchens, a stack of napkins people had saved from holidays. The corridor smelled like onions and pepper and the buttered sides of bread. People came. The newly divorced man from 7D, the young couple who had not yet learned to sleep when the baby did, the painter, who talked to canvases in the afternoons, the woman with a scar from sternum to belly button who wore it like a zipper and did not hide it, the boy who looked always over his shoulder. They ate. Someone put a jar with coins down on the card table without announcing it. The jar did what jars do. It collected quietly what the world offered without asking how much it all was supposed to cost. Helena cooked the next night. Not soup, a stew that tasted like letters never sent. Tomatoes cut into rough pieces so the slices had still some shape. Beef browned without apology. Herbs clapped between fingers before falling into the pot so they would remember to release what they had stored in their small bodies. A piece of orange peel to remind the tongue that bitterness has cousins. The corridor gathered again. Stories gathered with them. They spoke of first paychecks and how the money felt the same in every hand, but heavier in some. They spoke of rainstorms that trapped them under awnings with strangers and how sometimes the best conversations happen when next steps are impossible. They spoke of mistakes they had not regretted, and of some they had. They spoke because a person needs permission, and an audience and something good to chew on in order to give themselves to words. Someone filmed on a phone held too low. Someone else posted to a group where no one knew what to do with anything that did not scream to be noticed. The city did not go viral. It went attentive, which is rarer. The critic came. It was 3 nights later. He wore no disguise. He held a bowl. He took one sip, then closed his eyes in a way that suggested he had just remembered a street he used to live on. He ate with long pauses between spoonfuls as if the soup were talking and he did not want to interrupt. He finished and wrote one sentence in his notebook, and put the notebook away. Helena did not watch him as if he were the center of the only story. She served more bowls. She wiped the ladle with the corner of the towel the way her mother had taught her so the soup would not dilute itself between servings. The critic nodded to her as he left. The small nod people give when there is too much to say and too little time to say it. Cesar reacted as men react when the mirror begins to show a face they do not like. He filed a complaint with the city's sanitary office. He called Helena's cooking clandestine, the word dripping like threat and respectability all at once. He suggested she was feeding the neighborhood a risk. He hinted that food without permits counted as crime. The inspectors came without siren. 2 wore expressions that had learned to be neutral without forgetting that they were human faces. One was a woman who looked as if she did not have time for anybody's drama. Not today. They walked through Helena's apartment as if it were a restaurant in miniature. Gloves, thermometer, storage? The woman asked, checking not to catch, but to know. Helena showed a drawer of gloves, a thermometer she'd bought with the last money she'd intended for shoes, logs of temperatures taken with the care of someone who knew how a small mistake could grow into pain. The inspector opened the fridge, the freezer, the cupboard where spices smelled like a museum of places she had not been. The inspector pulled a bowl of soup and tasted. She raised one eyebrow. "Write down what you're doing," she said finally. "Put it into a process. Apply for a license. We'll fine you for operating without paperwork. We'll return to inspect. But this is clean, and this is frankly good." People in the hallway clapped without being able to help it. The inspector did not smile, but her mouth made a shape that promised a smile later, in her car, when she remembered the taste. The fine was small enough to make people angry on Helena's behalf, rather than ruin her. The jar on the card table got heavier that night. A neighbor from the 2nd floor who fixed bicycles for a living and everything else for love organized a collection. The jar went from corridor to corridor. People dropped coins, bills, and notes. For a bigger pot. For your license. For a sign outside so we don't miss it. They added enough to rent a stall in the market's weekend fair. A 4x8 foot space with a stove that didn't judge, and a counter whose wood remembered generations of hands. Helena painted a sign in the black hour before dawn. Tempered memory. She set it to dry beside the bed and watched the letters like you watch a child sleep. Proud, terrified, awake in a way tired cannot defeat. The opening day was a good kind of small. The first line formed timidly, as if it were not sure whether it should exist. People looked at one another and smiled without too many teeth. Helena wrote the day's menu in chalk on a blackboard that had once hung in a classroom where multiplication tables had been memorized with rhythms. "Old letter stew," she wrote, and beneath it, "bread that remembers." The critic came again, not with the air of a judge, but with the posture of a hungry man. He stood in line. He paid. He ate. "What broke that night," he said when he was done, "was not a plate." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a paper napkin, the kind restaurants buy in the thousands, stamped with Olo Legato's logo, a flourish that had once impressed Helena and now looked like a signature on a bill that would go unpaid. The napkin had a line of grease and a shadow of something that had touched it before it dried. On the napkin, in neat small letters, someone had written, "Regulator inconsistent again, requesting maintenance." The name below, Leo Carvajal, a date, a signature with a flourish too confident for a runner, Cesar. The critic explained, "I picked this up from the floor that night when the plate fell. I thought it would be part of the story I would tell. I didn't know how yet. Now I do." He folded the napkin and slid it back into his jacket as if it were a passport. He wrote his column. He wrote it in a city where words could still move people when food didn't try to be more than it was. "I was present at a performance that called itself a dinner," he began. He described the heat in the kitchen, the way men sometimes pretend the public is a mirror that will only ever show them what they want to see, the way humiliation is a spice used by those who cannot cook. He named Cesar as a man who ran restaurants the way some men run countries, by making other people's labor look like a miracle he had personally invented. He described Helena's soups and stews in a paragraph that would be clipped and placed on refrigerators in houses that had not yet learned what it meant to want something enough to wait in line. He did not make her a saint. He did not make Cesar a devil, but he did something rarer. He made the reader feel the weight of a hand snapping an apron string and hear the quiet of a corridor filling with soup bowls and stories. He included a picture of the napkin. He ended with a sentence that did not force a lesson. "Some kitchens believe in shows. Others believe in listening." The city responded the way a crowd does when someone simply says what everybody had been watching but did not know how to name. Reservations at Olo Legato fell. Not to nothing, of course. Money and habit do not die into silence, but enough that the floor staff suddenly had time to refill water, and the manager had time to stare at an open spreadsheet and wonder whether a different career might be kinder to his sleep. People stood in front of tempered memory, reading a chalkboard that changed daily, and decided to wait because waiting had small rewards. Conversations, confessions, recipes pressed between strangers like flowers in books. Ex-employees of Olo Legato wrote emails the way soldiers write home from wars that were never declared. They sent them to lawyers who had stopped waiting for someone to ask nicely and started asking loudly. They listed repairs refused, hours not paid, burns laughed at, knives dulled for anyone who dared ask a question, and a culture of the show that had and would always invite plates to fall because the floor was a slick stage. Cesar filmed an apology in front of a glass wall that looked out on a city that did not look back at him. He wore a sweater that looked like a friend and spoke in a cadence that had been practiced in videos of other men explaining other mistakes. He used words like accountability and stood with his hands open as if he were surrendering to a police officer in an old movie. The comments under the video were the sort that will one day be worth studying in schools where rhetoric is a living subject. Too late, too polished, too much you and too little us. Someone wrote, "We ate your apology the way we eat a garnish we did not ask for." Helena did not watch the video, or if she did not tell anyone what she thought. She bought a larger pot. She hired Leo, the runner who had let the plate fall and had carried the weight of that night the way a man at a train station carries luggage for the person who never came back to pick it up. He was 19 and had arms that could lift and hands that shook sometimes when someone shouted his name. He came to the stall at dawn, scrubbed the floor on his knees because he wanted to prove something to someone, maybe to himself. Helena showed him how to check the regulator on their cheap oven and how to set a pan of water at the bottom to create a calmer heat. "Some ovens are like people," she said. "They work best when the air around them feels cared for." Her menu grew small, not large. She kept it to what she could make with the attention that makes food taste like respect. Old letter stew, long afternoon beans, bread that remembers, soup for the first rain, She added a dish that tasted like new beginnings and called it by the window, because people stood by the market's windows to eat it and watch other people carry their lives in bags. The stall filled with first-time customers, then regulars, then a small set of people who did not need a menu because they had learned that coming to Helena with a story was enough. She listened while she stirred. She leaned in to hear their words over the noise of the market. She wrote their names with chalk on the blackboard when they were not looking, and then wiped them away before anyone could ask what that meant. She collected a box of recipes. People brought her, written in different hands and on different papers, a page torn from a ledger, an old receipt with "add cinnamon" at the end, curling in the ink, a postcard from a city that had not heard from the sender in decades. The critic returned often enough to be called a regular, though no one would have said that to him. He ate and sometimes placed his plate in the dish bin and turned the hot water on and washed it. "Some stories don't need punctuation," he said once, drying a bowl. "They need to be told until they stop hurting." The market's landlords visited. Never once to miss a chance to turn people's attention into rent, they suggested a bigger space. Helena said the size was perfect. She did not want to scale a feeling into a franchise. "People get lost inside their own growth," her mother had written in a margin once. She heard it as she remembered other things her mother had said over onions and late rent. The city understood and misunderstood her at once. An article named her the mother of memory, and she laughed because the point was not about being a mother to anyone except a flavor that needed careful raising before it could go into the world and not return confused. A food show called and asked if she would compete in a series where cooks battled. She did not battle food, and she did not want to perform herself into something the city would briefly applaud and then forget. She said no, not unkindly. The kind of no that is a yes to a life not offered. In the contract, Cesar made a plan. Or maybe a plan made Cesar. He hired a PR firm to find the right phrases for a man caught tired in a story he had always told as success. He wanted to remake himself into a person the city would forgive smiling. He painted the kitchen, fired 2 managers, leased a different oven. He actually paid for the maintenance this time. He reprinted menus with an apology in italics. He offered a week where part of the proceeds would go to a fund to train cooks from underprivileged backgrounds. He made a point of using the word underprivileged as if privilege were a weather pattern rather than a structural plan. He held a staff meeting, apologized to the people still there, and meant some of it. He showed up at tempered memory. He wore the sweater. He took a place in line and looked at his shoes and at the blackboard and at her face. Helena looked back in the way you look at people you know too well to be surprised by their arrival. He reached the counter. He put money down. He said, "1 soup, please." She served it. He ate standing at the high table the way people do in markets when there are not enough chairs. He held the paper bowl with both hands. He looked at the wood of the counter as if wondering whether something he had once said had learned to live somewhere he had not thought to look. He finished. He put the bowl down. He looked at her, and what he saw was not an opportunity to give a speech that could be posted, but a person whose hands fed people and whose eyes did not hold room for him now. He began. "No," she said, not unkind, not angry. A word that meant, "Not here, not like this, not for you to put in your mouth as if it were also yours." He nodded, and for a second he was simply a man with a hunger he did not know how to name. He left without the video he had arrived hoping to make. People in the stall looked at each other without saying what they thought. Some thought, good. Some thought, too late. Some thought, a human being after all. Helena thought nothing she could say out loud without making words into knives, and she did not believe in cutting what could be left whole. In the weeks that followed, a quiet lawsuit moved like a boat on a dark river. Former employees pushed it. Lawyers navigated. Someone sent the regulator records. Someone else provided pay stubs with the numbers that didn't match the shifts people remembered standing to the weight of. A settlement arrived out of court. Money moved. People bought new shoes for their kids and a bed that didn't scream when a person turned. A manager sent Helena a text. "I bought a mattress. It doesn't hurt my back. I owe you nothing legally. I owe you something else." Helena wrote back, "Sleep." The critic wrote again, "Only one more time," and then he let the story be the city's. "We are fed by more than food," he began. "Some nights require applause. Others require soup. He told the story of the napkin again only briefly. He told the story of the inspector who lifted an eyebrow and was moved, and of the woman from 7B who found her husband again for 5 minutes in a bowl in a corridor. The best restaurants, he wrote, move traffic toward grace. Helena added a new dish to the chalkboard, the apology that works. People asked what was in it and she said, work. On the plate, a stew that took 12 hours and could not be hurried without turning into something else. Meat that yielded without surrendering its character. An acid at the end to keep the tongue awake. A piece of toasted bread rubbed with garlic and then brushed with olive oil, because apologies require 2 hands. The corridor dinners didn't end. Even with the stall, even with the line, she made time to cook on the landing once a week. The building now told a bigger story every time a pot was set down. The boy who had always looked over his shoulder stopped looking there so much. The woman with the scar wore a shirt with a deeper neckline and said she wanted to let the air know who she was. The newly divorced man began to talk about things other than the divorce and discovered he was a person. People made lists of the people they could now hold in their heads at once while eating. Mothers whose recipes they had failed to write down. Lovers whose favorite foods they'd learned too late. A child they hoped would not become someone who learned to talk only when shouting. Helena took a day off, the first in 6 months. She went to the library and sat at a table and read a cookbook written in the 1950s by a woman whose name no one said publicly, because a man had cut her off in television day after day until she stopped talking. She read the recipes and the introductions and the footnotes where the woman had written things to herself like, remember to laugh at the dough when it tries to escape, and do not let the world make flour less magic. She went home and took the jar down from the shelf where she had put the last of her mother's spices. She opened it and smelled it and closed it again because grief arrives in small quantities and preferred to be eaten with tea. She lay on the floor the way people do when the day will not go without being seen. She listened to the building move. She heard 6C's dog's nails on the floor and 8A's treadmill and the pipes talking to each other, with the confidence of old friends and the elevator deciding whether to moan. She did not cry. Or if she did, it was the kind of crying that waters something and does not flood anything. The next market day, the line began before she arrived. People had learned to dress for waiting. Hats in summer, gloves in winter, a book, a conversation, a pair of headphones in case solitude was the only person you could stand that day. She opened the stall. Leo checked the oven. Soraya, who had left Olo Legato when yelling became a permanent spice, now ran the grill for Helena 2 days a week. Tomas cured anchovies in salt in a jar he stored under the counter for a dish that tasted like afternoons on a wall somewhere in a seaside town. People kept promising themselves they would visit. A woman named Marta, who had never held a professional knife but had cooked 12 full Christmas dinners for a family that seemed to breed uncles, cut herbs with the reverence of a person saving fallen leaves in autumn between pages. A man came with a boy whose eyes were lost. The man explained. His son hadn't eaten well since his mother left. Food had become a negotiation he feared losing. He says everything tastes like cardboard, the father said, voice a little too bright because brightness keeps fear from showing how quickly it is eating through a person. Helena crouched so she could see the boy's eyes without asking them to rise. Do you like stories? She asked. The boy shrugged, which is a kind of yes that protects itself. Okay, she said. We'll eat a story. Leo, the small bowl. Thomas, that bread. Marta, please, the parsley last. She served a tiny bowl of beans kissed by tomato and a whisper of cumin. The boy sniffed and frowned, and then he ate one bean, grimaced, swallowed, considered, ate another. Tell me what you taste, Helena said. The boy said, something like the stain on my shirt when I fall. And she laughed, not at him, but because the truth recognized makes the mouth happy. That's the cumin. It tastes like a bruise smells, she said. Now blow on it. Taste again. He blew. He tried again. It tastes like I ran and I'm not running, he said, and his father closed his eyes because relief is a thing that needs the body to be still to be felt. The boy ate the bowl. He asked for bread. He ate that too. He did not smile, but he didn't throw the bowl away. People clapped, not because they had seen a performance, but because they had watched a person find a step back into their own life. Cesar passed by often now, always in simple clothes that worked very hard to look as if they had not worked at all. He Sometimes lifted a hand and then put it down. Once he waited until the line ended and bought a bowl and ate it standing in a corner and put the bowl in the bus tub himself. He left a tip that was too large. Helena took half and stuck the other half under the bin for the staff fund because money is like salt. Too much in one place ruins. Balance requires someone to move it around. A reporter asked Helena for an interview in front of the stall. The camera crew's equipment frightened the soup. The soup responded by getting thicker as if to stand up to attention. She talked. She said words that were all true, and none of them useful to anyone who wanted a headline like a slap. Food is quiet, she said. People are not. My job is to teach them how to meet in the middle. The reporter asked about Cesar, and Helena refused to turn a person into a theme. He has his story, she said. I have mine. The city will decide which it wants to tell its children. The inspector returned. This time, she smiled openly because permission is required exactly once. She checked the logs and the temperatures and the sinks. She ordered the stew and the beans and a slice of cake Helena had baked that tasted like good news. She watched people eat and talk and not look at their phones as much as they might elsewhere. She laughed at something Leo said and then caught herself laughing on duty and wrote a note, which might have said, laugh only when off duty, or might have said, laugh whenever soup instructs. A week later, the inspector brought her mother to the stall. The mother wore a purple scarf and a look on her face that suggested she had not been allowed to enjoy anything freely since 1998 and intended to begin again in public. She ate, she cried, she hugged Helena too long. She took the inspector's hand and said, this is what I wanted for you when I asked you to be careful. Not the careful, this. The inspector pretended to be embarrassed and then looked at Helena and shook her head as if to say, look what you did. The legal machinations around Olo Legato ended not with a bang, but with people moving on. The money did what money does when it is asked to stand still and mean something important. It moved quietly to bank accounts where it helped. The restaurant still existed. People still ate there. New managers turned down the volume on shame. New cooks learned to ignore the mirror and look at the pan. The critics stopped writing about the place. Not out of spite, out of clarity. He had said enough. The city could fill in the rest. Helena sometimes thought of the night of the plate. She didn't replay it to punish herself. She used it the way a musician uses an old recording of a song played too fast. She slowed it down in her head and looked at where she had moved too hard and where she had given no room for stumble, and where she had expected a person to be more than 19. She called Leo by his name and not by whatever the kitchen had taught her to bark. She said we more than I. On a day when rain made the market into a room as intimate as a kitchen table, she wrote on the chalkboard, who we are when no one is filming. She cooked lentils with lemon zest and chili oil and served them next to a salad that tasted like spring grass. People ate and told stories they might have kept under their beds otherwise. A woman confessed she had never liked her father's signature dish and had lied to him every birthday. A man admitted he scrolled old text, threads to hurt himself when he was bored. A teenager said he pretended to like parties because the silence after declining felt like punishment. They laughed, some of them. Some cried. Some asked for seconds. All of them stayed a little longer than they had planned before the rain stopped and their lives asked for them again. Her building's hallway dinners had become a neighborhood rumor that had tripped into tradition. People brought chairs now. Someone brought a musician one night, and everyone told him to put the guitar down because this was a room that did not need a soundtrack while people were working. The guitar came back the next week and the musician played quietly only when bowls were empty. He learned to keep time with the soup's simmer. Helena's mother remained a presence without becoming a ghost that wanted to be fed. Helena wore her mother's ring on a day when the chalk would not stay on the board and discovered it snagged the dishcloth in a way that annoyed her. And she laughed and put the ring on a chain and wore it around her neck and touched it at the counter when a person told a story that required a hand to hold something. She added a recipe to the box. For when you do not know what to do, the card read at the top, then the instructions. Onions, olive oil, salt, thyme. Ask a question while it cooks. Listen. One afternoon, when the sky had decided to be a color people could not name without sounding pretentious, Cesar appeared at the edge of the market with someone at his side, a man who held a camera but did not aim it yet. He approached, not quite fast enough to be rude, not slow enough to be dramatic. He waited. He reached the counter. I'm not filming, he said before she could say no. I am tired of filming. I'm here to eat and to say something, not here to take something. Helena did not ask him what he wanted to say. She served him soup. He ate and let himself taste it, which was different than putting it in his mouth while his head tasted his ego. He finished. He placed the spoon down gently. He stood. He looked directly at her. I told myself I made you that night. I told myself I created you by hurting you in public. I told myself I was the turning point in your story, and that I could narrate it if I wanted. I cannot. You made something with what I tried to break. I made nothing but noise. I am sorry. I owe you nothing that would look like money, but maybe something that looks like less noise. I am going to run other places differently. He laughed, a short, ugly sound. Or I am going to try. That is not your job to watch. Helena nodded. I accept, she said. Not the apology. The reality of a person trying to move a very heavy object inside themselves and not asking her to help hold it. She did not say she forgave him or that she didn't. She dried her hands on a towel. She turned to the next customer, a woman with nervous hands. What can I get you? She asked, because life was not waiting for anyone to finish their moral arc. In winter, the stall's breath showed. People blew on their food and then blew on their fingers. Helena switched to a stew that tasted like walking home in the dark with a light on in the kitchen window. She served tea without charging for it. She told Leo to go home early on the nights he looked like he was trying to stay in his skin by clenching his jaw. She told Soraya that if anyone came who had once shouted at her in a kitchen, they would be served with the same grace, and none of the energy that required forgiveness beyond the plate. She told herself to sleep when she could, and to stop telling herself that the next night would be calmer, because calm is not earned by promise, only by practice. A food magazine wrote about her without explaining anything she hadn't already written with soup. A photo spread captured the steam like an apparition, and the way her hands hovered for a second over a bowl, the way a mother hovers over a sleeping child to check their breathing without waking them. The title was too pretty. She smiled anyway because sometimes the world tries its best, and that should be encouraged. On the anniversary of the night Cesar tore her apron strings, the building's hallway dinner was larger than the corridor could hold. Someone hung lights across the width of the hall. Someone made a sign that said, apron strings, and then laughed at the melodrama and took it down and put up another that said, we're here. Helena cooked the onion soup from the recipe card in her mother's hand. She wrote the instruction, let it season, not flood, on a chalkboard in case someone needed to read it to themselves while sitting on the stairs. People ate and told the first time they had been humiliated in public and what they had done next. They did not talk about Cesar because he had become an event in a timeline rather than a person in a room. After midnight, when the last bowl had been washed and the floor had been mopped twice and the lights had been wound back onto their spools and stored in the closet with the vacuum and the paper towels that always seemed to be on sale the week before she needed them, Helena sat on the floor with her back to the door. Are you okay? Leo asked, body already halfway bent to sit beside her. Yes, she said. And tired. He nodded. That's the right order. They laughed. They sat for a minute without speaking. They could hear the building sleeping like an animal finally at rest. A man sent her a letter. In a stamped envelope, the old kind with a window. Inside, a note. I was at the restaurant that night. I clapped. I thought it was the right thing to do because it felt like the room asked me to. I don't know what to do with that now. I'm sorry. Helena wrote back. Thank you for writing. If you want to do something with it, come eat and bring someone who wouldn't come without you. He came. He brought a woman who held his hand too tightly, and then not at all. They ate. They cried. They were not fixed by soup, but they were warmed enough to think about the next thing. On a morning when the city smelled like wet iron, Helena woke at 5:18, the same time she noticed, as the day she had once been told her life had changed for the worse. She lay in bed and listened. The building did its small noises. The market outside exhaled its first trucks into place. She did not feel dread pressing on her chest. She felt a hand, her own, resting on her stomach, the way a person touches themselves, without noticing, as if to check that they still exist. She got up. She dressed. She put her hair in a knot that would come loose by noon, and she would fix it with the same hair tie because people who cook learn not to treat anything as single use unless absolutely necessary. She arrived at the stall before the lights of the market switched from night to day. She turned on the oven. She checked the regulator because habits save people when drama is asleep. She chopped onions because beginnings taste better when they are familiar. She put a pot on the stove. She waited for the oil to shimmer. She added the onions and stirred once, twice, 3 times, and then she stopped because things sometimes prefer to do their work when not watched. She set out bowls. She wrote on the chalkboard, the day after the day after. Leo arrived, hair under a cap, eyes not yet fully here. Soraya texted that she would be late because her bus had decided to be a boat, and boats are slower unless the river is mad. People came. They always did. People always come. For food and for permission and for the chance to stand near other people and say true things without being punished by the room's attention. The first bowl left. The second. The third. Helena looked up from a pot and saw a woman holding a child whose cheeks had that freshly cried color. And she smiled a smile that said the only thing that a person needs to hear sometimes. You're not too late. Long afternoon, after the rush had loosened. Its hands, the critic came. He did not eat because he had already eaten somewhere else. He stood at the counter. He placed the napkin on the wood, unfolded. He smoothed it with 2 fingers. He looked at it the way a person looks at a photograph of a place that has burned down. He sighed. He laughed at himself for sighing. He folded it again, smaller, then smaller, until it was a square you could lose in a pocket and find again when looking for something else. I'm going to stop carrying this, he said. It's not where the story lives anymore. Helena nodded. He put it in his pocket anyway. People hold on. People let go. Soup boils. Onions brown. Bread toasts. People tell the truth they can tell in the moment they are in. At closing, she washed the last pot. The water ran brown, then clear. She turned off the lights. She placed her palm on the counter, flat, as if checking a forehead for fever. She whispered, "Thank you," to no one or to everything. She stepped into the street where the city folded its tents and gathered itself for evening. She walked home. The wind was not too cold. It was the right temperature for the day the city had been. She unlocked her door and closed it behind her, and leaned on it for a second, and smiled, because the room smelled like someone would cook there again tomorrow. She put her keys in the bowl where keys go when people intend to stay. She looked at the magnet on the fridge holding her mother's "For when you do not know what to do" card, and she read the line again, though she could recite it in sleep. She turned off the last light. She let the building hold her. She slept. The city did what cities do. It forgot details and kept the lesson. Not a moral to be preached, a pattern to be repeated. When someone tried to humiliate someone else in public, some people clapped, most looked away, and a few went home and cooked for their building and listened to what people said between mouthfuls. When a person built an apology out of words and poor lighting, some forgave, some did not, and most returned to the question of what they would feed their families that night. When critics wrote, most read, some argued, and a few clipped the words and placed them under magnets shaped like lemons. If you need something that answers what this all was, it is this. A woman took a night where a man tried to make her smaller and turned it into a room where many people found space. A bowl held more than soup. A city learned nothing new exactly, but remembered something it had been taught and forgotten and was grateful to recall. The opposite of humiliation is not pride, it is dignity. And dignity tastes like something that has cooked long enough to make hard things tender and strong things gentle and hungry people patient together.